research doctorate in respiratory muscle physiology and a Master of Bioethics. She was the chair of the Royal Brisbane Ethics Committee for a long, long time before I was, and is currently the chair of the QUT Ethics Committee, has downsized from 2 ethics committees to 1, probably because it gives her more free time. And Conor's going to talk about, as you can see there, Transactional Research Ethics Review. So Conor, take it away.
Thanks very much indeed. Good morning, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, where we're all sitting and coming together virtually, and their elders past, present and emerging. I wanted to focus today on an approach to research ethics review and approval, which I think receives a lot of bad press. And that is a transactional approach, and by that I mean a discussion between researchers and reviewers which achieves a pact or agreement about the research and how it is going to be conducted. So why is this important? Last year, the NHMRC released its quality strategy, which really grew on a good deal of global concern about research quality, reproducibility, the rigour of scientific methods, and basically the value of published research. And in this document, it mentioned that the conduct of research encompasses not just the data collection and analysis and reporting phases, but also the much earlier parts of planning and development of the research question, the design and the methodology. Following that, a survey was undertaken of various stakeholders, including particularly researchers and ethics reviewers. And some of the factors that were identified, and obviously this is highly selected, but it is from the key messages, is that in order to encourage high quality research, ethical review processes, codes of conduct, policies, procedures, education and training about responsible research, all of those things that everyone sort of breathes a sigh of, oh my God, not again, type of attitude to it. But these are considered to encourage high quality research by researchers and by other stakeholders. But the perverse incentives to a good quality research culture were considered to be many of the things which affect us personally and of course affect the institutions, and that is competition for grants, for job promotion and the pressure to publish. Something else I wanted to raise was the matter of perspectives, and of course I'm going to come back to that, but interestingly in this survey it depended who you are or who you identify with as to what you considered to be the amount of effective mentoring that occurs about responsible research practices. So 55% of junior researchers felt that they were effectively mentored. However, that perception changed with seniority, so that 70% of mid-career researchers and 82% of senior researchers were pretty confident that junior researchers are effectively mentored about responsible research practices, which is interesting. So going back to a research ethics committee and ethics reviewers, so I'm not just talking about committees here, but also delegates, individuals who conduct research in the low risk area, of course, as well. How do we reach a decision about a study was some of the things that sort of concern me, and what apart from the balance between the ethical principles plays a part in that deliberation. And from that, how do we affect Lynn Gillam's proposition, which I completely concur with, that perhaps ethics review facilitates research? Oh, sorry. No. Let's go back. Okay. So we all know what we're supposed to do as members of a committee and ethics reviewers. We review in accordance with a national statement. And as Professor Freckleton highlighted on Tuesday, there is a beauty to the criteria and the categories of members of the committee, and they bring independence, diversity, a range of knowledge, experience, perspectives and skills. to the review of research. We're required to be familiar with the national statement and also to draw in other guidance that might be relevant to the research we look at. We're supposed to balance those principles when we think about the research and independently. So each person is required to reach a conclusion about the study. And then in a committee, as you will all know, we come together and reach a consensus decision as to whether or not the research can be approved or requires some amendment. I think it's a pretty good system, actually, and I think it is impressive that we review research prior to its conduct and establish and give reassurance about whether it's ethically satisfactory. And I think there's something to applaud. However, it's not perhaps at all surprising that there is a disparity of perspective between researchers and reviewers about things like not the principles themselves, because who could disagree with the principles, but the balance of those principles for a particular research project. And that spreads to whether or not there's sufficient detail in the application for us to really understand the various matters that go to make up those principles, including, for example, merit, which I find to be a particularly contentious issue, both in my days on health research ethics committees, but also in the university arena. We differ on the type of information that needs to be included and the way it's expressed, the tone of that information and the ease of accessibility. And of course, that was all touched on yesterday or the day before. Anyway, we disagree often about what constitutes ethical research. And this is something that was also highlighted in a large body, huge body of work by Guillemon and Lynn Gillam again from Melbourne, who undertook a qualitative study asking researchers and reviewers what they thought about the ethics review system and the approach and what went into approving research. And it's a very good piece of work. I don't think the conclusions have changed in the interval between about 2007 when the work was done and now. And I suppose my question is, should we be surprised at this disparity of perspective? And is it necessarily negative? And I don't think it is at all, either of those things, because we are engaged in this transactional process where we seek to understand each other's perspectives, how the research will add value, and reconcile those different perspectives, enhance our mutual understanding and education. And I have to say, after nearly 25 years of reviewing research of all sorts of different types, I am extremely well educated. I'm very, very grateful to all the researchers who have provided me with that education. But this transactional process bridges the gaps between what is put on the paper about what we think is going to happen and actually what will happen in practice. Because one of the good things about research ethics committees is how often we say, well, I don't understand how that's going to work. What will happen if? So we are in a very good position following a transactional approach to resolve questions about research conduct, which of course, as we know, is going to improve the quality of research. This was also found in that paper by Guillemon and Lynn Gillam. Now I've got if this thing's going to move on, which it doesn't look as though it is, I've got a couple of examples. One is a paper by an anthropological researcher from New Zealand who researches in the field of conflict, violence and terrorism and goes into what sounds like very, very dangerous circumstances. And he has been frustrated over the years, and he has a long career in this area, by what he sees as the increasing risk aversion of ethics committees, but also university safety review committees, who tend to say that, well, you can't do that because it's just too risky for us and we can't get insurance. He also has, and I urge you to read this paper, he has commentary on the power wielded by these committees and how that may be a challenge to academic freedom. And I must say, I've got a lot of sympathy with that, because we have to keep in mind as ethics reviewers that we do wield a huge amount of power, and we need to exercise that very judiciously. However, the final third of his paper deals with his experience actually sitting on an ethics committee. And he urges researchers, and from his time on the committee, he found that the engagement of researchers in a sort of a transactional process resulted in a good safety plan being delivered, and ethics committees being reassured that researcher safety, and of course others who might be involved in rescuing them should they get into trouble, that these risk mitigation measures were satisfactory. My second example is a paper by Sean Dix, Ian Piper and others, which is a fascinating self-reflective case study, but in forensic detail, about the discussion between a PhD candidate, the HREC Secretariat, the supervisor, about the research and how the research is eventually approved. And again, I urge you to look at that, because the attitude on all sides was that this is a learning exercise and we are here to resolve differences of opinion, diverse views, and improve the quality of the research. Another example is one at QUT, a slightly different level of example, but for many years we have had some concerns about the use of biospecimens, including long-established cell lines and also less long-established cell lines, and whether or not we can determine that they were obtained in accordance with the national statement, either chapter 3.2 or the national statement that would have applied at the time, or the ethics guidance that would have applied at the time. And so we've done quite a bit of work in this area, and you'll be aware that Fiona MacDonald talked about this a couple of years ago, and we shared last year some of the outcomes from the work we've done. But I just want to highlight also that these days journals are expecting similar evidence of due diligence about the provenance of such samples. So I think it is something that we need to keep in mind. So QUT has prepared guidance, the ethical use of human biospecimens and cell lines. I think that's what we have shared with some people in Queensland before. And that just identifies that ethical authentication of samples is as important as clinical or technical authentication of those samples, and provides some guidance on how we can go about finding that, getting information and evidence for the ethical authentication. We established a database of cell lines for which we believed that the provenance was sufficiently ethically satisfactory. And I have to say, having conducted a lot of that, a good deal of that sort of review, it's far from easy, but at least we felt we were undertaking a process whereby we could sort of balance the concerns that there might be. And we've made this database accessible to QUT researchers to facilitate their applications using the same sort of specimens. Sorry. Okay, I don't know what I've done here. Right, and also, no, it doesn't like me. Okay. I just also wanted to mention that Ben White, in his talk about the Victorian legislation on voluntary assisted dying, also highlighted how important that transactional discussion between the researchers and the reviewers was in sort of reaching a point where that research and his and other research that he's undertaking could be done. And we certainly valued his engagement in that. So transactional ethics review, I think, is extremely important and we should not be ashamed about. It clarifies the ambiguities in the application, which allows us to get enough information about what will happen in the research to be able to understand the ethical issues and balance the various principles. It's particularly helpful, I feel, in an area which is often lacking in an application, and that is in about recruitment strategy and entry criteria for participants, and also the area of risk. It allows us, by the exploration of practical difficulties, to sort of reach a point where we can resolve some of those difficulties, but also recognizing that not all can be resolved. And I think that's probably me now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Conor. I think, Conor, you've really nicely reinforced the need to engage as much as possible with researchers. I think there certainly can be problems if we go down the paradigm of get application, have a view in it, then send it back, because it's not quite as transactional as you suggest. Sometimes there aren't opportunities for earlier engagement, but as far as possible, I think we should try and endeavour to do that. Conor, just a couple of questions for you then.
Yep.
Do you think, as you said, ethics committees wield some power? Do you think ethics committees should be trying to modify the project of the researcher during their review?
No, I don't. I don't think that we should be saying things like, well, have you thought about not doing a qualitative research, but doing a quantitative survey? I absolutely disagree that we should be making suggestions about how a research question should be answered. I do think it is very legitimate, though, to say, you have this particular research question. Can you please explain how your methodology will achieve answers to this research question, because we don't see it. That's a very different question. So reviewing what is in front of us and asking questions about that, we are certainly not trying to make this the best possible research.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great answer, and I think I always endeavour to suggest to the committees I sit on that we should be focusing on the ethical aspects as opposed to the research aspects. And I think if we do that and stick to the ethical principles, then we keep ourselves in a very strong position. Can I
just answer that, Gordon?
Certainly, Conor.
One of the things that I experienced in the UK, and I do find with a lot of researchers who come from the UK, that there is this sort of sensitivity about asking questions about merit. Now, that is very much an ethical consideration. So it's legitimate to ask about the research, the methods, but as I said, it's not legitimate to start trying to become a researcher with the research team. So I just think we should accept that research merit is an ethical issue.
So another question was: is some of the issue about the limitations of written applications versus a discussion or video to explain the information? And let me rephrase this another way. I think, Conor, and please comment on this. We are limited by what we have in front of us.
Yep.
And we can only act upon that. Would you agree with that?
Yes, we should only act on that. I think, though, where we enter into a discussion and someone says, oh yes, well, what I meant was, but also let me flesh that out, if there is a discussion, then my response to that is, great answer, can you put that in the protocol, please?
Something came up in the chat box, which I won't ask, but Noting it's 9 minutes past, Conor, I think we might stop there.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think that was a really clear talk about some of the issues I think that ethics committees have to be cognizant of, and the necessity to interact and engage to get a better outcome in that transactional method that you suggested. So, Conor, thank you very much for your presentation.